Jewish audio on Chabad.org.
So we're here tonight to discuss the Jewish pathology. The Jew is a different type of creature. There's something unique about the Jew. You know, when it comes to high holidays, there's this interesting phenomena. We call it in Hebrew the Achat Bashana Jew. Achat means one, Bashana of the year, the once-a-year Jew. What does that mean? Jews that suddenly wake up, they need to go to services, they need to hear the shofar, or they need to fast on Yom Kippur because it's the high holidays, regardless of their observance of other days on the calendar, regardless of their professed beliefs or lack thereof. They flock to the synagogue to worship, to celebrate, and to commemorate. Now, some have looked at this phenomenon and seen hypocrisy. All year long, we don't see these folks. We don't hear from them. Suddenly, it's the high holidays, and they show up. And so there have been a lot of possibilities. It must be the guilt, a Jewish psychoneurotic condition. Maybe they're just hedging their bets. Just in case there really is a God, let me put in some time. On a more serious note, you find some that will think maybe it's because they feel they owe their deceased parents some respect, and so they come to the synagogue and recite the Yizkor. Various theories as to what prompts suddenly the once-a-year Jew to show up. The Lubavitcher Rebbe utterly rejected any such notions or analysis. He had a totally different take on it. The Rebbe would tell us, and tell anyone that would listen, that if you study the phenomenon of the once-a-year Jew, you will discover the powerful truth that is even bigger than Yom Kippur itself. You will discover the true meaning of what a Jew is. And the Rebbe urged us to cherish, to embrace the once-a-year Jew, and to realize how precious indeed they are. If you dismiss it as Jewish guilt, you're missing the whole point. If you suggest that this person just wants to do something nice for their parents who have passed on, then you have a shallow understanding of what's really at play here. After all, they can simply stay home and light a candle. They can plant a tree in Israel. They can dedicate a plaque in Hadassah Hospital. Why are they coming to the synagogue? There is a very curious statement in the Talmud. The Talmud says, Torah machrezes alachsan yeshalah. Translated, that means the Torah will always return to its hosts. At first glance, it seems to be saying that once a Jewish family establishes a connection to Torah, to Jewish study, to practice, it is bound to surface in that family from one generation to the next. In other words, once traditional, always traditional, it never leaves the family. So one rabbi posed this very obvious question. It sounds good, but is that really the case? Do we really see that all the time? Don't we find families or individuals who happen to be the descendants of deeply religious Jews or Torah scholars who are not quite following in the footsteps of their fathers, of their ancestors? They may be very proud of the fact that they have this impressive genealogy. They may even display photographs of their pious grandparents on the mantles of their fireplaces. But it doesn't necessarily demonstrate how they lead their own lives. A colleague of mine told me that one Hanukkah, he was at a local shopping mall. They were hosting a Hanukkah menorah celebration in the center court. Suddenly this couple, obviously very delighted and inspired by the festivities, comes over, and after talking how beautiful everything is and how beautiful this Hanukkah celebration, it's so nice that you're here, the woman can't control herself and she blurts out and she says, "I'm Santa Claus's mother." So the rabbi looks at her and says, "Okay, nice to meet you, Mrs. Claus. She says, no, I'm serious. You see the guy over there? And she points to the jolly fellow in the red suit sitting at this kiosk across the way taking pictures with little kids. That's my son Joseph. And she starts yelling, Joseph, come here, say hello to the rabbi. And Joseph Santa makes his way over, introduces himself, and says, hello, Nachas, that's my son Joseph. At one point in the conversation, the father says to the rabbi, Moshe Isserlis, do you know? Have you ever heard of Moshe Isserlis? So my colleague says, Moshe Isserlis, of course. Every student of Jewish law heard of Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, known as the Ramah. He lived in the 16th century. One of the most prolific commentaries on the code of Jewish law. He says, well, I'll have you know that he was my great-great-great-great-grandfather. That's right. My father told me that we're direct descendants of Moshe Isserlis. And my friend is thinking how beautiful and how sad. This man is beaming with pride at being a descendant of the Ramah, of Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. But where has it all gone? Where is it going from here? The Einikel is now Santa Claus at the Promenade Mall. And it's quite common that we have many that are far removed from the trails blazed by their ancestors. So how do we reconcile this with this Talmudic statement that the Torah returns to its hosts? Is it really true? Do we really see it? And the answer lies in one key word. It's a word that you've heard many times, only perhaps never quite fully understood just how important a word this is in understanding Judaism. The word is morasha. We translate in English, heritage. We use it all the time. In every write-up, come explore your Jewish heritage. A heritage trip, a heritage workshop. What is the meaning of the word heritage? It comes from the Hebrew word morasha. One of the very first passages we teach our children from toddler age on is the verse of the Bible, Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov. The Torah commanded to us by Moses is the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. Even when they're still in the cradle, we start singing them. Torah, Torah, Torah. That song, Tziva Lanu Moshe Morasha. So when our children are little infants, we're talking to them about their heritage. What's the difference between the word heritage and inheritance? They seemingly mean the same. This is the heritage passed on to you from Jacob, or this is an inheritance that's been passed on. An inheritance is something that's handed to you. If you claim it, if you take possession of it, if you use it, it's yours. You have claimed it. It's been passed on to you. If you don't, if you decide not to take it, it's not yours. No one could force it upon you. It's been passed to you. Now it's up to you. Morasha, heritage, is a lot stronger. It's something that's always there. It's in the family and it will remain in the family. In other words, whether you claim it or not, you still have an inherent, irrevocable right to it. And this right was given to you the second you were born. That's the way it is with Torah, with Judaism. Whether you know much about it or not, whether you understand it or not, whether you live it or not, it's there. It's an inherent part of you. Whether it's dormant or it's active, you are a carrier of Torah. Morasha kehilat Yaakov. The heritage of Jacob has been passed to you and it's within you. You own it just as much as the greatest scholars on earth, just as much as Moses and Aaron themselves. You know, we find this very strange phenomenon with the Jewish people. You think about it. If you walk into any other place of worship other than a Jewish place of worship, Go in on any given day, and you find people praying there or doing their thing. They're excited, they're emotional. Ask the average person sitting in the pews whether they believe in God. If you were to ask someone in a church or a mosque and you came in and you say, tell me, do you believe in God? Chances are you'll get this very inspired, perhaps eloquent answer about their faith, about their belief in God. Ask them if they're religious, they'll say, of course, that's why I'm here. Now let's try this in a synagogue, lahavdil. You go into a synagogue. Let's pick even the holiest day of the year. Let's pick Yom Kippur. Ask the average congregant whether they believe in God. And you're going to get some very interesting responses. Do I believe in God? I don't know. I'm not a philosopher. I don't know. I'm not into that. It's a big question. It's a big question. I'm a simple person. I mind my own business. That question you ask the rabbi. The rabbi will tell you if we believe in God or not. I don't know. What do you mean when you say God? What does that mean? God is too abstract of a question. So you say to him, okay, fine. So what are you doing here? You're in a synagogue right now. And he says, what do you mean, what am I doing here? It's Yom Kippur. I'm here. Oh, so you're religious. That's the real, you don't say that to a Jew in a synagogue. Religious? Oh, no. I'm not religious. As a matter of fact, I'm very uncomfortable being here right now. Because I'm not religious. Not to mention the fact that I haven't eaten since last night. I'm very hungry. I'm very cranky. My mouth is very dry. It's hot and it's cold all the time, especially if you daven at the Hyatt. I'm very tired. I'm bored because I don't really understand what's going on. And I'm wearing these very silly Crocs because that's what they told me. I can't wear leather today. So you say, so then I don't understand. You don't know if there's a God. You do not want to call yourself religious, and you're fasting and you're praying all day. Why did you come? And they say, what do you mean? What kind of stupid question is that? It's Yom Kippur. And then they usually say, my grandfather from my mother's side, he was religious. I'll always throw that in. Sad. Hey, I'm not religious. Likewise, same, we had this at a Passover Seder. We just finished Passover. Ask people at a Passover Seder, ask your guests if they believe in God. You'll get long answers. Ask them if they're religious. You'll get a very short answer. No. And in any other religion, it would be an insane question to ask people in the middle of a religious service if they're religious, because of course they're religious. To someone who doesn't know what a Jew is, it's a very weird conversation. It goes in circles and it makes no sense. But if you really know what a Jew is, it makes perfect sense. It's exactly what a Jew is. As the Rebbe would put it, a Jew who walks into the shul on that once a year is coming home. That's what they know. Religious God, I don't know. It's Yom Kippur. This is my home. I come home. He may not understand what's going on there. He may not be able to articulate to you what he believes or what she believes, but they know this one thing. This is where I belong. Morasha Kehilat Yaakov, that's the definition of the word heritage. The Torah is your heritage. Judaism is your heritage. It's your identity. The best word, it's your essence. It's the very essence of who you are. Shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was this wave of immigrants who came out of Russia. Growing up where they did and how they did, most of the men were never circumcised. They never had a bris. So there's an organization in New York that would arrange for them to have a proper ritual circumcision. We're talking about adults here, not 8-day-old babies. And we're talking about not the simplest of surgical procedures. And it takes quite some time for recovery. And yet there was a line of these folks waiting to have a bris. So a reporter came up to one of them, a fellow in his 30s or 40s, and he says, "Wow, you must be a very religious man to be doing this." The Russian immigrant says, "Not religious. I don't know the first thing about Judaism." "So why are you here?" "I'm here to have a bris." "So you must be religious." "No, I'm Jewish." So the reporter says, "Do you ever hear of bagels and lox? It's a lot easier." To the outsider, it makes no sense, but to the insider, it makes perfect sense. This is who I am. Rabbi Manis Friedman is fond of saying that the best description he ever heard of what a Jew is actually came from a priest, a man named Father Dubois. And the priest said the following definition of a Jew when asked, "How would you define a Jew?" He said, "A Jew is someone who is religious without even knowing it." Religious without knowing it. Now, I saw this firsthand a few years ago. A fellow came to see me. This was a little before Rosh Hashanah, a year and a half ago. He was originally from Argentina. He and his family recently moved to the Conejo Valley right before the story takes place. They moved from Manhattan Beach. And we begin our conversation. He makes an appointment to see me. He comes in and he says, "Before we begin, I need to make it clear with you. I'm an agnostic." It's another interesting phenomenon about Jews, that Jews always need to identify before they begin their conversations what they don't believe in. I didn't ask you to sign in, believer, agnostic, atheist. Before we begin, I need to tell you that I'm an agnostic. Okay. That's nice. And then he begins to tell me everything he doesn't believe in and how much he despises organized religion. You ever hear that expression? I don't like organized religion. I begin to show him my desk. It was sloppy that day. I'm not organized. We can get along. This idea of organized religion I don't like. Okay. It's strange because I've never had a conversation yet with a Gentile that started with telling me what part of Christianity they believe in or don't believe in. I've never had any type of conversation with any non-Jew that immediately defines what they're not. I'm not a plumber. No one ever says that to me. A Jew immediately needs to come in and tell me what they're not, what they don't believe in, what they don't like. So back to my conversation with my new friend, the so-called agnostic. He tells me religion is totally not his thing. And he shares this story with me. He says, I once had a business acquaintance. This business acquaintance was involved with Chabad in Laguna Beach. This is a number of years before this meeting, and at that point this fellow didn't live in California, but he had a business relationship with someone in California, some partnership in a business, and his partner was involved with Chabad in Laguna Beach. And so he says that I came into California, we were going to have a business meeting. We needed to pick a location, and my friend says, no problem, we'll use the conference room at the Chabad house in Laguna Beach. I said, no way. We're not doing our meeting at a Chabad house. That's a religious place. I don't like religious places. I don't believe in organized religion. So my business partner said, who asked you to practice religion? I asked you to use a conference room. We're going to have a meeting. That's all we're going to do. I use the room all the time. Stop being silly. The rabbi won't bother us. It's safe for us to meet there. And reluctantly, I agreed, he said. Sure enough, we're having this meeting at this Chabad center, and who walks in the middle of the meeting? The rabbi walks in to say hello. Not enough just to say hello. He takes a look at me, a new fish, and he says, excuse me, sir, did you put on tefillin today? I give my partner a look. I warned you about this. I told you no meeting here. I looked at the rabbi and I said, no, I did not put on tefillin. No, I have no interest in putting on tefillin. The rabbi can't accept that for an answer. Why not? It'll just take a minute. I don't believe in organized religion. I don't believe in this. I don't want to practice. And I'm an agnostic. Did I tell you that? No, you didn't tell me that. Yeah, I am an agnostic. Well, we have tefillin for agnostics too. I told him I'm not interested in putting on tefillin. I will not put on tefillin. Then the rabbi says this to me. Listen, I don't want you to put on tefillin because it means something to you, because it doesn't mean anything to you because you're an agnostic. I don't want you to put on tefillin because you're religious, because you told me you're not religious. I don't want you to put on tefillin because it's part of organized religion, because you told me you don't like that. I'm a nice guy, the rabbi says to me. I'm asking you to do this as a favor to me. That's it. That's simple. I'm a stranger to you. I'm asking you a favor. I score points if you put on tefillin. For me, it's valuable. For you, it's nothing. It's meaningless. It'll take you a minute. But for me, whoa, I scored today. I looked at him and I said no. He saw the seriousness in my eyes. He backed off. He left the meeting. Anyway, this fellow was telling me the story. After I left, I was on my way to the airport, and this very strange thing happened. I started feeling guilty. I started feeling very guilty. Not guilty as if I did something wrong in God's eyes, because I don't even know if he's there. I'm an agnostic. Remember I told you that? Yeah, I remember. I just felt awful about the way I dealt with the situation. Because he was a nice man. His last question to me, that last challenge, what was my response? Even though I don't believe in this stuff, I believe that he sincerely does believe. I do believe that he, the rabbi, really does believe that it is important that I put this on, even though for me it's not important because I don't believe. But he does. And when he phrased it that this would simply be a favor to a stranger, why did I say no? Why not? Let us suppose it was something different. Let us suppose an elderly woman walked by the room at the time carrying packages and would say, excuse me, can you help me carry this bag for the next 2 minutes? Would I have hesitated for a moment? Would there have been any part of me that would say, no, I'm too busy? I would have jumped to do it. Pick any favor in the world that any human being, any total stranger would have asked me to do for them for 2 minutes. Who wouldn't do it? And why not? And here is this fellow that makes a very simple request of me. Put these on. And I absolutely refused him. And I couldn't come up with, as I traveled to the airport, the justification for me saying no the way I said it to him. So I did a very strange thing. As soon as I got to my destination, got off the next plane, I looked up Chabad of Laguna Beach. I call up and I ask to speak to the rabbi. And I say, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was the fellow at the conference room. Oh, the agnostic. Yeah, that's me. I feel terrible about the way I handled things at this meeting. I feel bad that I turned you down. Not because I believe, and not because I feel guilty about God, not because of that, because I don't believe in organized religion, of course. But the way you phrased it, that you just wanted a favor, I should have said yes. So here's the deal. I come to California quite often. I promise you, the next time I come to California, I'm going to come by, and I'll let you score some points. I'll come to your office, you'll put on film with me, you'll feel good, and I'll feel good that I don't have to carry this guilt with me anymore of having let down another human being. And indeed, he says, that's exactly what I did. The next time I was in town, I visited the Chabad house in Laguna Beach. And I let the rabbi put tefillin on me, for him, of course. And the next time I was in Laguna Beach, I did it again. In fact, every time I would come to California, this became my appointment. I would visit the rabbi, put on tefillin, so he can score some points. In fact, after many of such visits, after some time went by, the rabbi made a suggestion. He said, why don't you get a pair of tefillin of your own so that you could put on tefillin on a regular basis, every day? For me, of course. This way you won't always have to travel here. You'll always have it. Wherever you go, take the film, think of me, do a favor for me. I score points. Then it made sense to me. So I bought a pair of film. I put on film every single day, he tells me. Not for me, not for God, for him. It's important to him. Of course I said, yeah, I am. Then he tells me the next part of the story. He says, my father, he was a very wealthy man in Argentina. But he even believed less than I believe. I didn't know how you can possibly get to that point. He said, my father had such an aversion to Judaism that as a matter of principle, he would never step a single foot in a synagogue. He wouldn't walk in. That he was very religious about. Not walking in, that he was strict. He tells me, this fellow, that twice a month, his father would take him, when he was a youngster, to a local synagogue. He would knock on the door of the synagogue. The rabbi would say, come in, and he would say, no, I don't walk into synagogues. The rabbi would come out of the synagogue. They would have this exchange, some type of debate every single time. The rabbi would keep inviting him in. He would say, absolutely not, I don't walk into synagogues. And then he would always hand the rabbi this letter. And one time I said to my father, I understand that we don't believe in God. I understand that we don't believe in religion. I understand we don't go to the synagogue. I understand all of that. But is it really so important twice a month to send the rabbi nasty letters? Do we have to do this twice a month? He said, my father got very serious, and he looked at me and he said, dear son, no, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in religion, but I'm a Jew. And the people that go to that house, to that synagogue, they're my people. Those are not nasty letters. That's the mortgage payments. I pay for the synagogue to be there. It's important for our people. But he really didn't like organized religion, my father. And he didn't believe in all these rituals. My father was an agnostic. Did I tell you that, he says? My new friend then tells me why he came to see me. Tells me that he had a conversation with his son when his son was 5 years old. And his son asked him outright, Dad, do you believe in God? And I said I couldn't lie to my son, so I told him I'm not sure. I don't really think so, but I'm not sure. I gave him reasons why yes and why no. My son then says to me, well, Dad, I hope you're not disappointed, but I do believe there's a God. And he went on to make this brilliant argument defending his case for belief in God. And Rabbi, that's why I'm here. I have 2 children. They love Judaism. They love learning. They love the traditions. So as I'm moving into the Conejo Valley, I want to find out about Jewish educational opportunities for my children. Not for me, you understand, for my kids. Because I'm not religious. I'm an agnostic. Anyway, we wind down our conversation, my new non-religious friend, and he's about to leave. And he turns to me and he says, oh, by the way, when do you guys do kaparot? I said, excuse me? Let me tell you about kaparot just for a moment. Kaparot is a tradition that some people practice before Yom Kippur. You probably have heard of it. We take a chicken and we put it around our heads before Yom Kippur, and we say that if anything was supposed to happen to us, we place it onto this chicken's head. We put it onto the chicken. The chicken is then slaughtered properly. The chicken is then given for charity to the poor. Kapara means an atonement, so that this is an atonement for anything negative that was supposed to happen to us. We pass on to the chicken, and the chicken is thereby done a mitzvah given to someone poor to eat. It's a strange ritual. It's not practiced widely. This fellow who doesn't believe in organized religion, who doesn't know if he believes in God, wants to know when we do kaparot, in which I said, why do you want to know? He says, because that I do. I was saying, I couldn't control myself anymore. I said, 1 second here. You're a self-proclaimed agnostic. You're not into religion. You don't believe in organized religion. You don't believe in rituals. Yet you put on tefillin every single day. Of course, not for you. And you want to know when we're going to do kaparot, swing a chicken around our head before Yom Kippur. I didn't say I was an atheist, Rabbi. I'm an agnostic, not an atheist. I said to him, I hope we can continue meeting on a regular basis. He says, yeah, I heard you're a good debater. I look forward to it. I said, no, not to debate with you at all. I want to learn from you. Learn from me? He said, what can you possibly learn from me? I said, from you I learned the beauty and the true meaning of a Jew. Religious without even knowing it. My friends, we can look at this man and see someone who is conflicted, or we can see true greatness. A Jew who says, I don't want to be religious. What do I need religion for? What's wrong with me the way I am? I don't know if I believe in God. But Yom Kippur is Yom Kippur, and tefillin is tefillin. A Jew is religious without even knowing it. There's a statement, Anachnu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, we are believers, the children of believers, even if we don't believe it. You follow that? Deep down. Even if we don't believe it, we're believers. In the words of the famous Rabbi, Jackie Mason, Mister, do you understand this? Only by Jews do we find that the connection to God has little to do with I feel, I think. Because the real truth about a Jew is that by virtue of your very soul, you are a piece of godliness. The greatness of a Jew is not that he or she does mitzvot. It is that he or she is the mitzvah. This is who you are. This is what you are. It is a heritage that has been passed on to you from one generation to the next generation. It belongs to you regardless of how much you claim it or even how much you disclaim it. You can run, but you can't hide. Because sooner or later, Machzeres, it comes back to its hosts. As the man's 5-year-old son made it pretty clear, sooner or later it comes back because it's you. It's who you always were. Back in 1929, there was a young man by the name of Menashe. Menashe lived in the Israeli city town of Hebron. Now this Menashe was sort of the black sheep, not just of his family, but of the Jewish community. In fact, he was a rebel. For whatever reason, he had a great deal of contempt and disdain for his religious brethren, who made up the majority of Hebron in 1929. And he would seize on any opportunity to heap scorn and misery upon his fellow Jews of Hebron. On Shabbat, he would spitefully ride his motorcycle through the streets with a cigarette clenched beneath his teeth, honking his horn, yelling out all sorts of insults to people who would go to and from the synagogue. Who were his friends? The local Arabs. He would hang out with them in the cafes, in their homes. About his fellow Jews, all he would have to say was, who needs them? I have nothing in common with them. And then came that very dark Saturday. You may have read about it, you may have heard about it, part of our painful history. August 22nd, 1929, the day of the terrible Hebron massacre. Armed Arabs came streaming in from all surrounding areas, beating, stabbing, and shooting every Jew in sight. After they killed the Jews in the streets and synagogues, they began going from house to house, looking for new sacrifices. Eventually they arrived at the house where Menashe was sitting with his Arab friends. Who is he, the gang asked, pointing to Menashe. Leave him alone. He's one of us, the Arab buddies replied. The murderers turned around, walked out, letting him live. They moved to the next house. Suddenly, inexplicably, Menashe came running after them, yelling and screaming at the gang of killers at the top of his lungs. No, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew. I'm not one of you. I'm a Jew. 67 innocent men, women, and children were butchered that day. One of those 67 was a righteous soul named Menashe. May God avenge his blood and may his memory be a blessing for us all. The Talmud tells us a person can acquire his entire world in a single instant. What leads a man who denied, who scorned, who alienated himself from his people all his life to do this? It's that spark in the soul, that pure, untainted soul, that morasha, that heritage that links us to our fathers and mothers that could never be severed and can reveal itself at a moment's notice at any time in any place. Around 30 years ago, there was a woman from the Midwest. Her name was Karen. She had very little interest or involvement in Judaism, but she had a friend who would always try to encourage her. One time, this friend managed to schlep Karen to a lecture. The guest speaker that night was Rabbi Shlomo Hecht of blessed memory, a Chabad rabbi from Chicago, who had begun his rabbinical career under the directorship of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. So she's sitting there listening to Rabbi Hecht's talk, and he opens by saying that he had the privilege of being in the presence of the previous Rebbe for one of his last public addresses. And at that gathering, the Rebbe, quoting the Baal Shem Tov, said that very often, if you hear something being said, it's not just a coincidence. He said it could be that somebody from another world is sending you a message through the third party. And this third party doesn't even know why they're saying what they're saying, but they are inspired from someone else above who needs to deliver a message to someone that's in the audience. That's the opening story Rabbi Hecht tells that the previous Rebbe told at one of his last gatherings. This girl Karen is listening to this, and she finds this notion rather intriguing and interesting, messages from another world. That's pretty heavy. And then Rabbi Hecht begins his formal talk. And he says this, that towards the end of the war, we established a fund called Keren Hatzalah. We in America established a fund to help the Jewish refugees in Europe. We collected at that time $180,000 just from our congregation, from our community, to distribute to Jews in Paris and in Israel. $180,000 back then is a nice sum of money. It still is. Among the three people who were sent overseas to distribute those funds was a man by the name of Samuel Broda, of blessed memory. If you've ever heard of Best Kosher Food Products, Samuel was the president of the Best Kosher Food Products. Karen is paying very close attention to Rabbi Hecht's story. Rabbi Hecht continues his story. He says, when the delegation came back from Europe, Mr. Broida gave the rest of us a full report of his trip. And Mr. Broida told us that he had an experience that he will never forget. He said in Paris, there were thousands of Russian Jewish refugees, many of them children. He said, I spent a lot of time talking to these people, and I picked a little boy at random. And I asked this little boy, I said, I'm going back to America. Is there anything I can get for you and send back? I'm expecting to hear a bicycle, a camera, a watch. I just picked a boy. What can my community send back to you? Tell me, dear child, what is your wish? And Sam Broida is talking to the rest of us, giving us this report. And he says, do you know what this 8-year-old boy said? He said, I wish that one day I can travel to the United States of America and I could see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. 8-year-old boy asked about any wish I can send him, and says, I wish I can go to the United States to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Sam Broider then turns to Rabbi Hecht, and he says, Rabbi Hecht, I realize that I'm here in America, and I've never had the opportunity to have a meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And if this 8-year-old boy, if that could be his dream in life, then why shouldn't I have that opportunity? You're closely connected. Can you arrange an appointment for me? I would like to meet him. This was in 1947. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the previous Rebbe, was not in the best of health. It was very hard to get an appointment, but somehow Rabbi Hecht says I was able to pull it off. I flew to New York with Sam Broider. Mr. Broider went into the Rebbe's office for his private meeting, and I waited outside in the hallway. We came out of the room. He came out of the Rebbe's room, and you can tell that he was crying. He wouldn't tell me what was said. All he said was that was the most incredible experience of his entire life. Karen, who's listening to this story, is weeping uncontrollably. Rabbi Hecht finishes his talk. He immediately goes over to this woman in the audience who was crying rather loud. And he says, excuse me, did I say something to upset you? And she said, Rabbi, Sam Broider is my grandfather. Rabbi Hecht looked at her, was quiet. And now it was his turn to tear up and get all emotional. And he says to her, I want to tell you another part of the story that I didn't tell the rest of this group. After your grandfather came out of the Rebbe's room and left 770, left the synagogue of the Rebbe's secretary came out, and he was looking for me. And he found me, and he said, the Rebbe wants to see you. I was brought into the Rebbe's office, and the Rebbe says to me, Shmuel Broider was here about an hour ago. We spoke about many things. But when I asked him how things are with his children, he started to cry. And he seemed very troubled. He seemed very disturbed. So I want you to know, the Rebbe says to me, that I promised him, I made a promise, that one day he will have tremendous nachas, deep pride, from the spiritual growth of his grandchildren. I said amen to the Rebbe's blessing for Mr. Broider, and I left the room. From that night until this very moment, I never understood why the Rebbe called me into his office to tell me about the promise he made to your grandfather. The girl, Karen, who was listening to all of this, understood quite well. At the time that Sam Broider passed away, he had 6 children, 17 grandchildren. Not a single one involved in the slightest way in any type of Jewish practice. They simply weren't interested. They weren't affiliated. Rabbi Hecht then said, I think tonight I said something that I needed to say. But moreover, I think that you heard something that you needed to hear. Something that someone up there really wanted you to hear. Your grandfather's tears in the Rebbe's room all those years ago. They're here with us tonight. Shortly thereafter, Karen enrolled in a Torah seminary in Crown Heights. Today, Karen is known far and wide as Shifra Hendry. She's a teacher. She's a writer on principles of the Kabbalah. Her writings have inspired tens of thousands. She has beautiful children and grandchildren, all leading very proud Jewish lives. And Sam Broider is having nachas up above in heaven. Torah machrezes alachsanya shalah. The Torah returns to its hosts. My friends, I've seen this in so many different ways. I know so many people who didn't go searching. As a matter of fact, traditional Judaism was the last thing they ever thought would play a role in their lives. And it just happened. You ask them today, how did it start for you? How did you get inspired? And they say, I'm not really sure. I was minding my own business, and I bumped into this rabbi, or I sat on a plane and there was this person, or someone handed me a flyer, or someone schlepped me to this. Somehow it just happened. And here I am. Everyone has their own story. But this thing often happens whether it comes from left field or right field. That inexplicable thing, a stirring, an awakening, something in your soul that gives you pause. What is it? Where did it come from? Perhaps a grandfather of yours. Someone a generation or two back. Maybe even 10 generations back. Maybe someone lobbying and calling out to you. You have a rich heritage. I left you a vast spiritual estate. Go claim it. It's yours. Around 9 years ago, there was a young yeshiva boy. His name was Mordechai. He lived in Rockville, Maryland. During the summer, the boy decided to dedicate his vacation time to serving as a volunteer at a senior home, a Jewish home for the aged. One of his responsibilities at the home was to invite the residents to attend daily services in the little chapel that they had on the first floor. Some of the folks were interested, most of them were not. But even those who declined the invitation, they were generally very pleasant and respectful about it. Except one man. This one man who was on the second floor, he was always quite nasty about saying no. In fact, one day he let loose a barrage of angry insults at one of the young volunteers who asked him if he would be interested in attending the services. The volunteer was so taken aback by this man's verbal attack that Mordechai decided that he's going to go have a talk with this man. You don't have to insult the volunteer. You can simply say, I'm not interested. He found the man sitting in his wheelchair in the lounge, and he introduced himself. My name is Mordechai. I'm volunteering here for the summer. And he said, listen, if you don't want to join the services, that's fine. I respect that. No problem. Why the insults? Why the anger? Why do you have to be that way? The man was quiet. And then he said, young man, please wheel me to my room. I want to tell you something, but not here. In my room. Mordechai wheeled him to his room. And the old man began to tell him his story. He said, I came from a prominent Hasidic family in Poland. When I was about 12 years old, the Nazis invaded. He and his family were taken to concentration camps. All were killed quite early on in the Holocaust, except for him and his father. They managed not just to survive, but to be together in a concentration camp. In the barracks with him and his father was a man who managed to smuggle in a half of a pair of tefillin. There's the hand pair and there's the head pair. They managed to get the head pair. That's all they had. And every morning, whoever wanted would take this pair of tefillin out, and they would put it on even just for a second, say the Shema, and they would feel their connection even at a place like this. Even though it wasn't both pairs of tefillin, it was just one, even though it was just for a few seconds. The man continues his story. For my father, he said, that wasn't enough. You see, my bar mitzvah was coming up. And he wanted that at least for the day of my bar mitzvah, that I would have a complete set of tefillin. You would think, in a concentration camp, who's thinking about tefillin? And you have one pair? Okay, so put the headgear on. No, that wasn't enough for my father. No. For his son and his bar mitzvah, a complete pair of tefillin. So he heard that in the barracks down the road, a man had passed on who owned a complete pair of tefillin. And so on my 13th birthday, on the day of my bar mitzvah, my father went out early in the morning to the other barracks to see if he could get the tefillin so that I can put them on my bar mitzvah. I was waiting by the window with fear and with trepidation. I knew he was taking a huge risk going out like that. And then in the distance I can see him. He was rushing back. As he came closer and closer, I can see he was carrying something cupped in his hands. He was so close to our barracks when suddenly a Nazi stepped out from behind a tree and simply pulled his revolver out and shot him. Killed him right before my eyes. In a split second, he was gone. I tried not to scream. And as soon as the Nazi left, I ran out to the field. I embraced the body of my lifeless father. I kissed him. I said farewell before being barked out to return to the barracks. For decades, every time I hear about a bar mitzvah celebration, all I can do is think about my bar mitzvah. How cruel. It wasn't right. It wasn't just. You want me to celebrate Judaism? How could I? The old man looked at Mordechai and he said, so tell me, young man, you want me to pray to God? You want me to pray to a God that allowed a boy's father to be killed right in front of him on his bar mitzvah? You want to know why I respond the way I respond to the request? Mordechai, the volunteer, was stunned. He had no words. There are no words. Finally, he said, please forgive me for asking. I understand. I'm sorry. And he walked out of the room, promising him he would never bother him again. He came home that evening and Mordechai couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. So disturbed by the story, so in pain for this man. A few days later, Mordechai is helping the men come to their little chapel for their services, and one of the residents comes forward and says, I have yahrzeit today. I need to say Kaddish. They do the count. They have 9. That they already made their rounds throughout the whole senior home. Everyone has turned them down. The only one they didn't ask was the man on the second floor. But Mordechai had told him he wouldn't bother him again. But this other fellow needs to say Kaddish. He decides to give it a try. He goes upstairs, expecting to hear it from him. Braced himself for the tongue lashing, but what could he do? He knocks on the door. The old man opens. It's you again. He said, look, I'm sorry to bother you. And I know what I promised you. I'm simply going to put it out there. You decide to do what you want. There's a man downstairs. He's one of the residents here. Today is his father's yahrzeit. He wants to say Kaddish. We have 9. Would you join us? The old man looks at Mordechai and he says, if you promise me that this is the last time, I'll come. That was far better than he expected. He took the deal. As they're about to leave the room, the man points to the dresser by the wall and he says, I want you to open the top drawer. Mordechai opens the top drawer, and there he saw an old tefillin pouch, crusted, faded for many years, not being used. Bring me the tefillin, the old man said. He brought it to him. The old man took the tefillin in his hands. He held up the tefillin and he said, this is the last thing that I got from my father. These are the tefillin that he was carrying that day. These are the tefillin that cost him his life. And with that, he wheeled him to the elevator, took him downstairs to the chapel. Mordechai asked him, would you like me to help you put the tefillin on? He said yes. He went and conducted the services. The other fellow said the Kaddish. And he came back to his friend from the second floor to see him holding the straps of the tefillin, crying over and over, Tata, Tata, Father, Father. The old man looked up at Mordechai and said, for the last half hour I felt so connected to my father, I finally feel connected to him again. Mordechai took him back to his room and the old man said, please do me a favor. Come back for me tomorrow. I'd like to go again. Every morning thereafter, Mordechai would go first to the second floor. The old man would be waiting for him at the elevator with tefillin in his hand. He would wheel him downstairs to the chapel and he would put on the tefillin and the entire time crying, Tata, Tata, Father, oh Father. One morning Mordechai got off the elevator on the second floor. The man wasn't waiting for him. He wasn't there. He hurried to his room. The bed was empty. He knew something was wrong. He ran to the nurse's station and asked where the man was, and they told him that he was rushed to the hospital the previous afternoon. And later on that day, he had a stroke and he passed away. A few days later, as the summer drew to a close, Mordechai was given an award by this Jewish home for his work as a volunteer. And after the ceremonies, a woman approached him and thanked him for all he had done for her and for her family. He said, do we know each other? She said, I was the daughter of the man that you developed this relationship with. And I want you to know that you did so much for him. You made his last days on earth so joyful, so comfortable, so meaningful. And I want you to know this, that when he was being rushed to the hospital, he wouldn't let the attendant wheel him out of the room until he said, take my tefillin along. He wanted to hold his tefillin with him. And when I arrived at the hospital, there he was, grasping this tefillin so tightly. He wanted to be there with tefillin in hand. The last thing he said to me while he was alive was, take this tefillin and give it to my grandson and ask him to promise me that on his bar mitzvah he will put on these tefillin so that our heritage continues. My friends, we are a remarkable, incredible people. Our heritage defies and transcends anything of this world. The Torah returns to its hosts. It doesn't just so happen that you have this inspiration. The lives and the legacies of those who came before us are not just events and memories of the past. They are dynamic, ever present in our own lives. They are with us and they try to help us find our way. Our lives are not isolated blips on the stage of world history, but we are vital links. All of us are. Vital links in a chain that bridges all the generations of the past to the generations of the future. And when you really think about it, that's an awesome privilege and an awesome responsibility that we have. I'd like to conclude with one final, simple story. It's about a beautiful little boy, an only child named Dov Ber. He lived in the early 1700s. When Dov was 7 years old, his father tragically passed away, leaving him and his mother alone in the world. Mother and son shared this tiny 2-room wooden home. with very little furnishings and the barest of necessities. As difficult as things were, there was one thing that Dov's mother would not compromise on: her son's education. She worked 2 jobs thus so that Dov could continue to be educated by Rabbi Yossel, the finest Melamed, the finest Torah educator for miles around. Her favorite part of the day was when she would pick up her little Dov from the Melamed's house, from the teacher's house, so that they can walk home together, at which point Dov would share with her all the lessons he learned that day from Rabbi Yossel. He was so excited and animated by the studies. One evening, as mother and son were heading home together, they turned the corner of their street and they see a horrific sight. Their little humble home was totally engulfed in flames. The street was filled with the crackling sounds of burning wood. Crowds were running, yelling, grabbing pails of water, but it was all too late. Their little house had burnt down to the ground. Watching this scene unfold, the shock of it hit hard. All gone. Clutching her son tightly, she could no longer hold back her tears, and the mother cries out bitterly. Young Dov looks up and sees his mother's pain. He hugs her, and he says, "Don't worry, Mama, everything will be all right, don't worry." She wipes away her tears and she says, "My dear son Dov, I'm not crying for the reasons you think. No matter how difficult things might have been, I have always deep down believed that everything would work out. I know that God watches over His children. I know God watches especially over widows and orphans. So believe me, it's not the lost furniture or the lost home that I cry about. I cry because in our home we had something called the Sefer HaYuchsin. We had a genealogy book, a book passed on from one generation to the next, recording who your ancestors are. The book of your ancestry that was passed on from one generation to another generation, with everyone adding their own entries. I would read you from this book every night so that you would always remember who you came from, who your Zaidi was, who your great-grandfather was. It would show you the greatness of those who came before you. And now it's gone. The book has been burnt, gone forever, and that can't be replaced. Young Dov looked up at his mother, and he said, "Mama, please don't cry. Yes, we lost the book of genealogy, but I promise you that I will begin writing a new one. I will start a new book of genealogy starting from you, Mama. I promise you that your great-great-grandchildren will be proud to learn that they came from you." Her mother smiled. His mother smiled, nodded her head, and said, "Of course you will. Of course you will, my dear Dov Bear." Ladies and gentlemen, little Dov would grow up to become the famous Reb Dov Bear of Mezrich, otherwise known as the Maggid of Mezrich. He was the Rebbe and the mentor of Reb Schneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad. In other words, had it not been for him, we wouldn't be sitting here today. Little Dov kept his promise. He did indeed go on to write that new book, and here we are, in a sense, reading from that book, learning its lessons and basking in the glow of its brilliance. And so, my friends, let us appreciate that we are the beneficiaries of a powerful Morasha, a rich and proud heritage, passed on to us through the generations. But at the same time, let us all have the vision to begin writing a new book of our own. It's not just about who your grandparents were. It's who you are. Our children and our grandchildren should take pride in you Let's not just rest on the laurels and ride on the shoulders of those who came before us as we proudly display their pictures and tell their stories. Let's write some stories of our own. We're taught that every Jew was there in spirit at Mount Sinai when God gave the Torah. We're taught that those that would convert to Judaism, their souls were there at Mount Sinai. We all have that spirit within us, and that spirit allows us today to start writing our own book. You have that heritage. Now go ahead and claim it. Make it your inheritance. Make it shine. It's waiting for you. Claim it as your own, and then pass it on to the next generation. Write your own book. Write your own story. Fill the pages of your book with stories about your Jewish experience. Write about your Passover, your Shabbat, your classes, your studies. Fill it with memories of your Hanukkah candles and your dreidels and your latkes. Write your own story. Wherever you live, and whoever is watching us on the internet, wherever it is you are, and I've seen the comments coming in from literally every continent on the world. Wherever you are, there's a Chabad center near you. Get involved and start writing your own book. Start writing your own biography, because it's your heritage. So learn it, know it, live it, because it's time to write your own chapter. I challenge you, you here and you listening throughout the world. If you don't participate in a synagogue on a regular basis on Shabbat, I challenge you now to pick any Shabbat in the next 3 months. Pick one and decide that that Shabbat will become far more of a true day of rest than any of the other ones. Make that Shabbat special. Whether it's a Friday night dinner in your home, whether you attend services that particular Shabbat day, whether you invite people to your home or get invited to a dinner, something on that Shabbat should stand out so that you begin to write your own story. When it comes to the holidays, whether it's Sukkot, build the Sukkah. On Simchat Torah, dance with the Torah, or get dressed up on Purim, or put a mezuzah on the doors of your house if they're not already there. Write your chapter. When you do these mitzvot, you're not becoming religious. You're just being you, the true you. And you're writing a book for you and for the next generation, so that when they will be at the crossroads of life, when they will be faced with real challenges, these seeds of the mitzvot that you have planted will serve as a guiding light for them, just like those that our grandparents planted for us, to serve as a guiding light and an inspiration for us. Let your children know that you're writing a book for them, and that they should continue to write this book for their children and their grandchildren. By writing our own books, we will surely do our ancestors proud, and we'll do our children proud, and we'll do our God proud. Thank you very much for joining us.